Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to everyone tuning in and everyone who will watch this on demand later on. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us as we talk about one of my favorite things, Italian wine, of course. And a big welcome back to Ed White and Julie Farricker, who joined us last year. Yes, yay. For a three-part Italian wine education and tasting series in 2021. And back by popular demand, they are here again to join us tonight. And I will just briefly intro myself. So for anybody who does not know me, I'm Alex Heron, the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement for the DeLand campus of Stetson University. Very happy to manage and oversee a lot of these virtual events and now getting back to some more in-person events. So maybe soon we'll have Julie and Ed on campus in person. That would be exciting for a wine tasting. But for now, we will settle and do these virtual ones that are just as much fun. And again, thank you all for joining. I will go ahead and throw it over to Ed and Julie to intro themselves for anybody who does not know them, and they'll give a little recap on what they did with us last year before going into tonight's fun. So Ed and Julie, you can take it away.
Thank you, Alex. Again, my name's Ed. We've got Julie over here who is also on camera. We wanted to go through and welcome you guys back to Italian wine tasting. This is something that really is a dream of ours as far as wine and tourism goes. It is something that we're really passionate about, and I think it shows for everything that we do. When it comes to what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to do a little recap on everything and get to know us a little bit better. We're going to talk back about the Italian wine classifications and terms and stuff like that. And then we're going to combine two areas. So we're going to talk about Lazio and Tuscany. And we're going to talk about, do a little tasting for Lazio and go over some really cool information from Tuscany. And then, of course, we'll have plenty of time for questions if anybody has any questions. When it comes to where we begin with the Italian tour. It was a business we started a couple years ago. Pretty basically, right before COVID, we started this business. We were doing really well. And then, with travel restrictions, everything changed. We created our own brand. This was back in 2016 when we were in Rome, which is, in Lazio, which we're going to be talking about today. We wanted to make sure, though, when we created our brand, we put our own stamp on everything. And I think you kind of see that when it comes to the presentations and stuff that we do. One of the things that we absolutely love is our wine passport. So if you have not signed up for our wine passport, I do encourage you to do that as well. We basically travel around to different regions of Italy. There's 21 different regions. We'll travel around to those regions and we will give you information, history background, and information on local wines and send along some wines for you to taste. We usually throw in something every couple of orders as well, that's from that region. So you can see, taste, smell, feel it. It could be anything. So from food to flashcards with Italian language, we have it all. One of the things that we do is, like I said, we put our own brand on everything. We created a company that allows us to express ourselves creatively through something we're absolutely passionate about, which is wine. Again, you've got three different things. Our customers are segmented into three different options. You've got our monthly subscribers. We have special events and tasting like this one that we're doing right now. And we do local delivery as well. So we can ship any of our wines that we have here at the Italian Cellar, located in Virginia, to about 20 states in the United States. So that's what we do. I'm going to pass it off to Julie to do a little recap on the Italian wine classifications and go over a couple terms real quick, and then we'll hit the tasting.
Perfect. All right, buonasera dalla cantina italiana. So good evening from the Italian Cellar. I'm Julie, and again, thank you for joining us tonight. So before we get started with our Italian wines, something to keep in mind is that Italy is very proud of its wines, just like it's proud of any of its exports. The Made in Italy brand is very important. And so for customers to have the highest quality wines, Italy and its consortio of wines has come up with a classification system. And you can usually see that when you're looking at Italian wine bottles. So if we, some of the bottles that you might have in your home, or even from some that we might be looking at tonight, if you see a gold sticker on your bottle around the neck, that usually means that we're dealing with a DOC G wine. So DOC G means Denominazione di Origine Controllata and Garantita. That's a fancy term for saying that there have been very strict rules concerning that wine. Now, Ed, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to see which wine did you hold up?
It was the Chianti Classico.
Right, okay, so, right, so a DOC G Chianti Classico, which if you do not see DOC G along with the Chianti Classico, you have a fraudulent wine. So of course, because Made in Italy brand is very, very important, sometimes there are fraudulent products, not just wine, but olive oils, cheeses, you name it, there's a way to make a fraud about it. But the classification system guarantees what you're drinking. So for example, with the DOC G Chianti Classico, which it's only Chianti Classico, that tells me you have a wine that has been aged for at least 2 years. The Sangiovese grapes have been harvested usually late October. Then you have a certain aging that's been happening in French Barrique. Then you have wine that has been bottled at a certain point, and then it is sold at a certain point. Basically, DOC G just means very strict rules. Sometimes producers are not comfortable with those rules, and they might say, you know what? I don't want to age my wine for 2 years. I don't want to have to use French Barrique, but I love the Sangiovese grape that we use for Chianti Classico. If that's the case, you might find a wine that has a DOC sticker on it, and usually the DOC is a blue sticker, and that just means that the rules are a little more relaxed. It's saying that we have, right, so this is for a different white wine, but I can tell you with this white wine here, this is the Orvieto, correct?
Yes.
So with the Orvieto Classico DOC, that means that the grapes were from a certain area of Umbria, sometimes into Lazio, depending on the producer, that the wine isn't aged as long. So usually this one could be 6 months to a year. The bottling doesn't take as long and it's able to be sold quicker. So this is a way for a producer to be able to sell wine quicker while its DOC G wines are waiting to be aged. Then we go to IGT wines, in the Indicazione Geografica Tipica, and that is usually just even more relaxed. That doesn't mean the quality of the wine isn't as good. It just means that you have a producer who has grapes. So for example, going back to Sangiovese, saying, you know what? I like my Sangiovese grapes. I have Chianti Classico brewing, not brewing, but you know what I mean. It's aging, it's getting ready, but I really just want to experiment and see what I can do with these grapes right now and make a wine. And so usually then you'd have something like a Tuscan IGT, meaning everything came from Tuscany because that's where, you know, Sangiovese usually comes from, but I just didn't want to pay attention to all the rules and I wanted to make a wine right now. So the classification system is important. It tells you what wine you're drinking and how, but it doesn't mean that all DOC G wines are the only best wines, because many Italian wines that have a very high price tag are actually IGT wines because the producers had experimented and come up with very good, I guess, like formulas for their wines. Okay. Again, some popular Italian wine terms. So we have some little language lessons for our Sunday night. So if you see a wine that's called the Classico wine, classic, we can take that from English, that usually it just means that the wine comes from the historic wine growing area. So that's why if you see a Chianti Classico or an Orvieto Classico, that means your grapes have come from the original area of that wine. Of course, a Chianti Classico is going to usually be in the center of a Chianti wine region. So that's why there's a difference between Chianti Classico and Chianti, and they're very huffy, okay? It's very important to know the Classico or not. Again, doesn't mean quality, it just means the history. A Dolce wine is a sweet wine. Some Italian wines can be very sweet, so that's why it's important to know when you're reading your menus, you know, with your desserts. A frizzante wine, think of something that's frizzy. So these are usually wines that are semi-sparkling with a little bit of bubble. So usually one of my favorites, Moscato di Asti, or even some, you know, your Prosecco would have some bubbles. And then anything liquoroso, just if you see the suffix oso for Italian, you're usually dealing with something that is very much so. So this would be a very much like a wine full of liquor. So higher alcohol level. Mezzo Classico usually refers to a sparkling wine that's gone through the champagne method. I use the champagne term because I know champagne can only be champagne if it comes from France, but Italy has its own version, which is very good, called the Franciacorta, that follows this similar method. But the Italian version of this champagne, which is far superior, is Franciacorta. Riserva, if you think of something that's a reserve, it just means usually higher aging time. And then, of course, maybe even stricter production, like the grapes might only come from a specific plot of land. And then secco is very important because some of your favorite wines, you might like them as dry wines, so secco, but you might not like that same wine when it's dolce, meaning sweet. So that's why it's important to know. And then anything that's superiore, think of the term superior, that usually means you're dealing with a wine that will have higher alcohol content, which means it did age longer. And again, maybe considering the amount of grapes that could be harvested, it could only be a very small percentage. So your Italian wine label tells you so much information before you even drink it.
When we go into the tasting, how we taste wine and stuff like that, one of the things that we talked about in the last series is that, you're not expected to know all of this, 100% up front. You find one of the four areas, whether it's the look, the smell, the sip, how it lingers in your mouth, if it lingers in your mouth, and you pick one of them and you learn it, better understand it, and be able to better describe it. And once you have that competency there, you become more confident in wine. You're able to describe different areas of the glass of wine a little bit better. And it just makes things, more exciting because you're able to share with other people what you're experiencing in the wine. And sometimes you might be, totally off, but I think one of the real lessons is to talk about it. When you talk about it with other people, you're able to express yourself a little bit differently. Sometimes you see things or smell things that they don't smell, and sometimes they're able to smell and see things that you can't. For me personally, I start with a smell. That's really where I started. Really, understanding the wine a little bit better. And then I've gone into, the look of the wine, and then, ultimately, to what it tastes like and how it lingers in your mouth. So it doesn't have to be in order. It doesn't have to be in any particular way. But we just encourage you to kind of explore a little bit more and really try to understand, the wine that you're drinking. And once you understand it, once you talk about it with other people, then you're able to share that experience with other people, which is what we do. The first region that we're going to be talking about tonight is going to be Lazio. So I'll pass it back over to Julie, and she can tell us a little bit about Lazio and the vineyard we're going to be visiting tonight.
Okay, so Lazio is probably one of the most, or if not the most important region of Italy, because Lazio is where we have the administrative center of Italy. So the city of Roma, or Rome in English. Lazio as well. Sometimes if you look at older Italian maps, Lazio is the Italian version of Latium. So if we think about Italian history, of course, with ancient Rome, Latin was the language of that area. So sometimes you will see older maps, even recent maps, but they're just, clinging to their Roman history. You'll see it known as Latium. So Lazio, if we think about it just besides Rome, about 30 minutes south of Rome, you're in the Frascati Hills, and that is an area that is filled with many different vineyards. We're dealing with olive trees as well, because many of the vineyards will be also producing olive oil. You'll see some of the picturesque hills that you will see in Tuscany. Usually people don't think of that with Lazio, but you're also going to be in a region that's filled with lakes. And a rule of thumb is that wherever you see a lake, in especially southern Italy, that meant at one point you were dealing with a volcano thousands of years ago. So there are quite a few lakes. And with these lakes, we have soils that are very vital to the wine growing regions. Another thing, though, about Lazio is that we think of it as Rome as the capital. We think of the administrative center where there's probably a lot of dysfunction. However, Something else to keep in mind is that with these wine regions, you would think that because of Rome, or you would think because of course, the seat of the Catholic Church, Vatican City, you would think that the Roman wines are very popular. However, they're not as popular. So one of the producers, so tonight we are tasting wines from Casale del Gio. This is a producer that has helped to bring Lazio wines back on the map. So not only do they produce wines from native grapes, something to keep in mind about Italy is that it has at least 600 native grapes. And those are the ones that are registered. I always tell people that if we really went out into some of these hillsides and villages, we would find more than, probably another 100 that just never bothered to be registered because the farmers just decided to keep it to themselves or never really talked about them. But Casale del Gio wanted to focus on the native grapes, focus on the history of the region, and then also had taken international grapes, which means grapes that aren't native to Italy, brought them to Lazio or Latium, like I said, depending on the map, and then from there was able to find the happy medium to grow grapes that usually aren't Italian grapes. So that's why even tonight, we're going to be talking about a wine that usually would be found in Spain, but because of the temperature in this region, because we're coastal, if you ever fly into Rome, which most people, that's where their Italy trip starts, Fiumicino, so you're right near the Rome city center, you're about 20 minutes away, it's near the coast. So we have coastal temperatures, we have mild winters, and the combination of the two are very good for wine growing. So, and I had the fortune about 2 weeks ago of meeting with the Casale del Gio because I was at Vin Italy, which is an Italian wine exhibition in northern Italy. And so I was able to visit with most of the producers that we sell, and they were very interesting. And they even, all of their pictures were about the land that, how they're trying to preserve the Roman history while also honoring the future of Italian wine.
And, just to interrupt real quickly, one of the cool things about this producer is the fact that, we spoke about entrepreneurship the last time we did a series. I mean, they are the epitome of Italian entrepreneurship. They started out with a vineyard, they produce olive oil, they have archaeological digs going on constantly on their properties. They have 2 restaurants, one at the vineyard and one in Rome. If you do make it to Rome, we highly recommend that restaurant. It was probably one of our favorites the last trip that we took together. But the food is phenomenal, the wine is amazing, and the staff is just on point. But when it comes to it, just like I said before, they found that opportunity to pivot, to grow, to change their business, and they just took it. They took that leap of faith, and they just kept moving forward, which is one of the really cool things about this producer. And their wine is quality wine. We see the label and we know that this is going to be a delicious bottle of wine.
It's interesting too, because, the FDA here in the United States has to approve wines that are being, imported, coming into the United States. And there's one wine that I tried at Vin Italy of theirs that was amazing, but the FDA didn't like the name of the wine, so they won't sell it. And so I'm hoping that in the future, we're able to, it was a dessert wine that wasn't too sweet, and that's a really rare find. So I'm hoping that I'll sell that one in the future. So, okay, so our first wine tonight is Bellone, and Bellone is one of the native grapes of Lazio. And when I emphasize native grapes, I say it this way. So if we were at the restaurant in Rome, Collegio, and we were ordering typical Roman dishes, so, carbonara alla gricia, or cacio e pepe, or even artichokes, and we asked for Bellone, that would be normal because that is a Roman wine. However, if I were in Milano, so the capital city that is by train maybe 3 hours north, if I asked for a Bellone wine, I would make a bet that A, no one would know what that was, or B, someone would say, go back to Rome and get that wine, because Italian wines are very regional. So this would be something you would find in Rome, or maybe Umbria, maybe Campania, depending on the location. But this is typical of Rome. It's a white grape that is back on the map again, goes back to Roman times. So a lot of things with Roman wines is that Pliny the Elder, you know, he was a famous writer. He wrote about this wine as well. So, all right. So Ed, show us this wine. Let's
Definitely. So again, the bottle, you can see the bottle on the screen, but if you don't, here it is again. Hopefully, Kathy, you have opened your bottle at this point. As far as the glass of wine itself, it is
beautiful color.
Deep yellow, very deep in color. Yeah. It almost, and you know, just as the tasting notes say, it says it's flecked with gold. It has a definite golden color to it. You can tell it's going to be something that's full of flavor. You know, when you smell it, to me, it kind of smells like not only the papaya and the, you know, the tropical fruit and stuff like that, but it almost smells like fruit candies of some sort, you know. So you can tell it has a sweetness to it, but it's not too heavy, it's not too sugary. It doesn't seem too acidic. It seems kind of crisp when you're smelling it.
And that's one of its trademarks now. So Bellone, like those fruit flavors, there's a difference. Like when I smell Moscato, I smell lychee, or, you know, something like Gewürztraminer, but Bellone has its own little tropical side to it. And in a blind tasting, so when I was at 5-Star Wines, it was interesting enough that it was not maybe this producer, but it was multiple Bellone wines, and I was able to pick up on them because the mango, papaya, when I was dealing with the fruits, I was like, okay, I think I'm either now with Bellone, and it was. So, you know, but bringing it back to Rome, how this is a really important one. If we look at the label, it even said Lazio Indicazione Geografica Tipica. And again, that tells me that the producer is, you know, respecting the grape of the region, which is Bellone, but it was not, you know, was aging it to its own. Because there are different, you'll sometimes see, you know, different forms of the wines with the same producer, just depending on the aging and the bottling. So,
and then when I mean, it's fairly, just like I said, it's fairly rich. You know, it's you know, it's a wine that would go well with like stews, you know, or you know, like heavier fish, or you know, something of that nature. You know, maybe like a fish stew, like a you know, or even like a chicken, like a Brunswick stew, which is local to Virginia. Something with chicken, something with tomato, something slightly sweet, not too heavy, but has that you know, non-brothiness to it, I guess. But yeah, and I mean, as far as the taste goes, you know, it's very rich, but it's also, you know, medium acidity. It's not too acidic. It's very easy to drink. I love it. It's got that zesty tang to it. So. So another one of the things that we wanted to go over, and this was the real, you know, the real subject of the Lazio wines were tannins. So I'm gonna pass everything back off to Julie and let her do her explanation of tannins and finding the pucker.
Okay, so with tannins, so when we're dealing with white wines, usually if I'm making notes, I'm focusing more on acidity. You know, is my jaw reacting to this? So that's usually how we can, you know, if you think about orange juice, something that's very acidic, lemonade, sometimes your jaw will react to that. But when we go to red wines, now there are some white wines that will have some tannins to it, not very many from Italy. But when we're dealing with tannins, that's more of the red wine aspect. So a tannin is when you think of a wine that's very corposo, which is Italian, that's fuller bodied, which means that when you take a sip of this red wine, even if you're looking at the glass and you see it's a lighter red, sometimes it's deceiving. You know, if you think of a Nebbiolo-based wine, which Nebbiolo is a very popular grape from northwestern Italy, those wines will be garnet or lighter red. But then when you take a sip, the tannins are very strong. That's a hallmark. Like in a blind tasting, boom, I know this is a Nebbiolo because of that. And the tannins are basically drying out the mouth. So sometimes it might even feel like your tongue is drying up. So if you take a sip of a red wine and all of a sudden you feel very thirsty, You feel that your mouth has been dried. Sometimes I remember people comparing it to, it's an odd, I guess, visual, but if you think of like tea, like it feels like black tea that's just drying in your mouth, think of Lipton or whatever. That's what tannins are. And the tannins are usually, when we're thinking of them in chemical ways, remember, wine is made up of chemical compounds. And so that would mean that certain grapes will be packing the compounds that will have more tannins. So like I said, if you like tannins, then you'll like wines that are more Nebbiolo based. You'll like some wines that are, especially from the Lazio region. So the one that we're dealing with now is Tempranillo. And what's interesting is, as I mentioned before, is Tempranillo is actually a Spanish native grape that has adapted to the soils of Lazio. So Casale del Gio found a way, to take this grape and then formulate it. Now, that doesn't mean that we'll find Tempranillo in all other parts of Italy. It's just that, like I said, the location of Lazio, it's coastal. The winters are more mild. There are hills, the soils, we're dealing with all these lakes that at one point were volcanoes. Perfect soils, perfect wines. And so Tempranillo is known for even having more of those tannins. So Ed, when you talk about the color, what color do you see tonight in that?
It's a deep ruby color. So, I mean, the color itself is very deep. When you look at it again, when we're looking at red wine or white wine, we're looking at it against something that's totally white. So a piece of white paper, a tablecloth, a napkin, something of that nature. We're not holding it up because the light's going to catch whatever's in the background and reflect it into the wine. But when you look at it, it's a very deep color. You can see the ruby along the edges. So you can really see the depth of the color in the center of the wine. When you look at the smell, I mean, the smell is exactly what you think it'd be. You got the hint of the spices and the woodland fruits, the raspberry, the blackcurrant, the plum. Yeah, I mean, it's all there. It's all very jammy almost. You taste it. It almost tastes like it's got a bigger viscosity than the other wines that you're tasting. So.
Right. And if we were in a blind tasting, when we look at the color of the wine, so when we see wines that are this deep ruby, almost purple, we think of fruits in a spectrum. So if we have lighter red wines, we're usually dealing, yes, raspberries, but we're dealing with not black cherries, but the other end of the cherries, strawberries. But if we're dealing with these darker wines that usually will be fuller bodied, and like I said, in Italian, corposo, then we're going to have the spectrum of the black currant, the plums, prunes, especially if that's how you can tell when it's going to be a higher alcohol level, is when all of a sudden now this prune, I'm having this image of prune, that's when I know, okay, now we're getting into higher alcohol. But the tannins, we usually can describe them too, as we can describe them as velvety, we can describe soft. It just depends on how your mouth reacts to it. I like something medium, but some people really like to pack a punch with the tannins.
So, yeah, I mean, I think this is, I mean, it's there. It definitely everything lingers. The taste, the flavor lingers on your mouth for a little bit. It's not going anywhere right away.
So the persistence is even longer. And some producers, if they know that the wine will pack a punch, the way to deal with tannins is longer aging. And then, of course, your food pairings. Italian wine is always meant to be paired with food. It's not meant for just happy hour with the glass. So you would pair it with something that could even out the tannins. So something meatier, something with more fat. So Ed, what would you have this with?
I think this is the perfect wine for a steak. Just a grill, very simple, salt and butter. That's it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts? Okay. All right. So now we go north to Tuscany. So really, if we're looking at the map of Italy, Tuscany is just one region north of Lazio. So, we're not going too far, but we're going to, I guess, your typical You know, I guess when I think of Tuscany, I just think of these postcards and hills. And in fact, I learned not too long ago, I think it was when I was there in January, I was on a bus, and all of a sudden I'm looking out and I'm like, why is this image familiar? And it was like these undulating hills. It was because it was the background from Microsoft. Like,
Oh,
you know,
wow.
the Microsoft wallpaper. And I was like, wow, I didn't realize that. So very iconic. But of course, if we look at the pictures, we think of the Duomo. I have a friend who's there today who sent some pictures from the Duomo. It was a rainy day in Firenze or Florence. We think of the river. We think of the Ponte Vecchio. We think of course, grapes. I mean, most Italian wines are the first thought would be Sangiovese or Chianti Classico or Chianti. And then what's interesting is the one with the little biscotti. So the Cantucci, which are just the smaller ones, are usually paired with the sweeter wines. So Tuscany, we think of, you know, classic Italy. We think of the birthplace of the Italian language. So classical Italian came from this region. That's another thing to remember about Italy, is that 21 regions. And these are regions that at one point were more individualistic, and they had their own languages, they had their cultures and their own spin on cuisines, and of course, even winemaking. So Tuscany was I guess the base for modern Italian language and culture. Of course, we think of the Renaissance. We think about Davide. I could stare at Davide all day. And we think about typical Italian images come from Tuscany or Toscana.
We have a couple of producers that we're going to be talking about tonight, and you know, I mean, as far as the Tuscan wines, we really have two that we have a couple that we work with, but this one right here, Sanfelice, it's located near Siena, which is probably going to be closer to the Rome side of Florence. You know, it's in the hills. It's a beautiful area. They do a lot when it comes to red wines, white wines, and even olive oils. So just like Casale, they're a medium to large size producer. They have all these hills, and they really go out into the city and work a lot in the cities and stuff like that to surround their vineyards.
And they have. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
On.
But they had been honored at Opera Wine. So Opera Wine took place, gosh, was that 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago? I can't keep track anymore. But it was the top 130 Italian wines, as noted by Wine Spectator, and Sanfelice and its Chianti Classico was considered one of the top wines from Italy. So it was awesome. Really neat to meet with those representatives.
Right. Well, so we're not going to do the actual tasting part of this tonight, but we're going to just talk about it a little bit. One of the things that you'll notice about the Vermentino is a little bit lighter in color, and it's a little bit lighter in flavor too. You've got a little bit more of an acidity to it, so you're going to notice more of a crispiness to the wine. It doesn't linger at all in your mouth. It's something that you'd probably drink with like fried fish or something, even a baked fish or something much lighter than the white wine that we had looked at before, the Bellone that we looked at before. But it has those smells of grapefruit, and the flavor of grapefruit and lime is super refreshing and crispy. I like to call this my summer wine because I enjoy drinking it outside. I know Julie just said you're not supposed to just drink it by itself. You're supposed to eat something with it. However, if you're looking for a white wine just to drink outside, this is the perfect thing because it's refreshing. It doesn't have that real sweet, sugary aftertaste to it. It's a delicious, crispy wine. So the other thing, and Julie, did you want to take over for this?
Okay, so
sorry.
Right. So just a note about Vermentino is that you'll see many Vermentino wines from Italy, but something to always remember is that you change your soil, you change your wine. And so Vermentino, you'll see it in Sardinia, and then it actually, that was really more of its main spot. But then if you think about the location of the island of Sardinia to the west of the mainland, then it had migrated north to Liguria, even into Piemonte, and then of course the Tuscany because along the coast. So if you like this Vermentino, it's always important to keep in mind that you might like a Vermentino from Tuscany because of those soils. So any Italian wine, you might actually like the soil that's helping produce the grape. So then when we think of on the next slide, going back to Chianti Classico. So Chianti Classico is probably the most iconic Italian wine. And it's when you're dealing with a typical Chianti Classico, a legitimate Chianti Classico, because I'm telling you sometimes, I know we talked about how there could be fraudulent things in Italy, shocker. But something to always remember is that when you see a bottle of Chianti Classico, usually on the neck, there will be a sticker with the Black Rooster. And of course, the Black Rooster, there was some type of a meaning behind that. And it goes back to the Middle Ages when there was something called the Lega dei Chianti, so the Chianti League. And it was just something, it was like a political organization for the Chianti area. And so, of course, honoring the history, if you see that Black Rooster, you're dealing with a Chianti Classico wine. So if you saw a Chianti wine, remember, Chianti Classico means the historic wine growing region, which is in between Firenze and Siena. It's going to be in the middle of it. But if you have a wine that is from, let's say, the Senese Hills, so Colli Senesi, and it has a Black Rooster, that's sketchy. That's fraudulent. I'm sure it happens. I could be on a quest for it and I could come up with a lot of different ones, but the Black Rooster is always synonymous with Chianti Classico.
So there is a little bit of a legend behind it, and the story is probably not true, but as the story goes, in the Middle Ages, there was constant warring between the cities of Florence and Siena, or the republics of Florence and Siena. So they decided the way to solve the boundary issues would be to send 2 horseback riders first thing in the morning when the rooster crowed from each city, and wherever they met, that would be the boundaries of the 2 regions. So Siena was, very fair with what they were doing. People seem to think that Florence might have gotten away with a little trick. They might have starved their rooster for a couple days and made sure it was severely unhappy, so that way it would crow earlier in the morning. And as the riders met, it was actually just right outside of Siena. So the rider from Florence had made it all the way down before the rider from Siena had even barely left the region. So that's why the region goes so far south, according to this legend. Mm-hmm. And just like Julie said, the logo, this just goes over the logo, 4 different versions of it, but the current one is the one from the 2013 right-hand side. The next producer we're actually talking about is our Chianti Classico. So just to talk about them real briefly, this is a little bit different of a Chianti Classico. It's not your normal one. It's got a little bit of a heavier, more distinctive taste to it. So it's deep garnet in color. You've got the smells of the prunes, the plum, the cherry. It's very earthy in the way it smells. So if you particularly enjoy those wines, you'll absolutely love this one. The wine is totally full-bodied and does linger on your palate for a little bit. So again, when we're looking at the foods and stuff like that we're going to talk about pairing with it, we're going to want those heavier foods. We're not going to want something that doesn't absorb some of those those same flavors and stuff like that from the wine, so that you can clear your mouth out a little bit. So yeah, the taste, again, cherry, plum, raspberry, leather. The spices are really, just like the Tempranillo that we tried earlier, the spices are really what lasts there in your mouth. So if like I said, if you like that type of flavor combination, this is the one for you. It's one of my absolute favorites. But yeah, the only other thing that we have before questions is, Julie, tell us a little bit about Umbria and your position as an ambassador of Orvieto wines.
Oh, so Orvieto Classico. So that is one of, I guess you would say, a very popular wine from Central Italy. And now they had asked to have some American ambassadors of that wine to, elevate the profile in the United States, to basically do what an ambassador does. I actually used to be a student ambassador at Stetson, meaning I used to give tours that would try to get people to come to Stetson. I did that for 3 years. I was one of the head tour guides. So this is something very similar, using my skills from being a tour guide, but instead focusing on Orvieto, the consorzio, meaning that group of Orvieto wines. And so I will be in Umbria this summer learning. I was there earlier this year, but this is more in depth to learn everything about Umbria, which is a landlocked region. So we had talked about today Toscana and Lazio, but if we went east and to this basically smack dab central Italy, landlocked, which means it doesn't have a coastline like most regions, I will be one of the ambassadors for the Eastern Seaboard and the Southern United States, basically going up from Florida probably all the way to the DC area for the Orvieto wines, to elevate the profile and have more people drinking Orvieto wines. So I'm very excited to do that and very honored to be one of the first ones.
It's awesome. Congratulations. We're very proud of you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess at this point in time, we can open it up for questions. Alex?
Yes, and congratulations, Julie. That's awesome. I'm
Thank you.
very jealous of that.
You're just going to have to learn more about Orvieto wines.
I am. I'm going to have to start coming on tours with you and
yeah,
really educating myself.
yes.
So I did have a question as we were talking about this earlier. Have you all found that there's ever an instance where producers might have wines that are classified as Doc G and then another as a Doc, or is it, if they're producing it, do they mainly have wines that are in the same classification?
So for example, let's think about the Tuscan wines like tonight. So Chianti Classico. So the producer will mainly be known for Chianti Classico, which means Sangiovese grapes, harvested sometime in October. Then it will be vinified and then aged for 2 years in French barriques, bottled, and then basically sold on the 3rd year. So whenever you're looking at a wine label, when you see a year, that's the year of the harvest. So I can tell you with Chianti Classico, you're not going to see a wine that's Chianti Classico that was from 2000. Let's see, we're in 22 now, from 21. That's a fraud. Now, again, the producer, though, might say, you know what? I have some really good grapes this year, because the grapes are affected all from climate and then also rainfall. So the producer might say, I've got some really good Sangiovese and some really good blending grapes that are from Tuscany, but usually aren't part of the formula for Chianti Classico. And you know what? I'm going to put Sangiovese grapes with Canaiolo grapes, maybe with some Merlot to add some deeper color to it. And so that's how the producer will get around the Doc G. The producer will make the wine with these different grapes, not age it at all. And then you could have all of a sudden a Toscana IGT, which means the producer dealt with grapes from the region, but did his own formula. So yes, many producers will do that for multiple reasons. It's either to sell wine while others are aging, like the typical one that usually has the higher price tag, or sometimes just for fun, to experiment.
And you don't really know what the weather's going to do to the grapes and stuff like that until towards the end of the growing season. So, you can't plan for everything up front. So this just gives them the opportunity to, still do the Doc G, still do the Doc wines, and then have that other version as well. Even if it's not for, bottling and selling, to the international market or something like that. They can really have the creativity to do whatever they want.
Right. And some of those wines that have, like, they call them super Tuscans. These are wines that, from Tuscany, and they're called this, like James Suckling kind of just made up this term because it was just, they're doing their own thing. It's the same grapes that could make a Chianti Classico or Brunello di Montalcino, which has the bigger price tags. But then it was like, well, I want to do my own thing. And then another big deal too is always year reports. So Annata means the year. Some years are better than others. and you'll always hear them gripe about it. Like, oh, summer 2000, I'm just making one up, 16 was too dry, so the harvest wasn't as good. But summer 2015, which I can tell you for red Sangiovese grapes, 15 is usually considered from recent years the best one. That will also affect it. So it's all about those years.
Any other questions?
I actually do have a question. So you were talking earlier about the volcanoes there. And so we know that Italy has had some volcanic in their history action.
Oh, yes.
So does that affect the soil where the grapes are grown? And if it does it matter for white to red and the grapes that are grown?
This is, my professor would love this question. So if we think about active volcanoes, so the most active one right now is Mount Etna, which is on the eastern side of Sicily. And that one's been very angry lately. And when I say angry, there have been quite a few eruptions, but they're not eruptions that cause the area to evacuate. But many of, the residents will end up having like the pumice, on their porches or whatever. But yes, it constantly affects the soil because you're basically having soil then covered by this volcanic rock, and it will affect it. So for Etna wines, because Etna will make an Etna Bianco, which is white, and an Etna Rosso, which is red, they actually say that the volcanic eruptions are helping the white wines. So, and the best white wines of Etna are usually from the eastern side. And right now, where's the most, I guess, soil changing constantly is on the eastern side and I'd say the east and then the southeastern side of Etna is really evolving with their soils. So yes, it does play a big role. And then northern Etna, that's where most of the better red wines were found because that soil wasn't constantly changing. It's like it's a more established soil. That's just for now. Maybe in 20 years, Etna, the eruptions might change and the eruptions might be affecting more of the northern side of the volcano. But for right now, the eastern side. But other things about volcanoes is that, so Etna's the most active. And then we think about the big one, we think about Pompeii, and that's Mount Vesuvio. And Mount Vesuvio is technically dormant, but you have 3 million people living in the vicinity of Vesuvio. And all of those residents are basically in evacuation zones. Like we know them in Florida for hurricanes, know your zone. They have to know their zones as well. But many of the wines from Mount Vesuvius, which are delicious and amazing wines, they just don't have the advertising. Those wines are usually seen as more floral. Well, I'm speaking about red wines, more floral, more perfumes, and more body to them because of those volcanic soils. So if you have volcanic soils, you'll have floral perfumed wines and also vines that were not affected by phylloxera, which phylloxera was a pest that ruined a lot of European vines. But if you're thinking of the ones, especially around Vesuvius or inland of Campania, because there were a lot of volcanoes there that just are non-existent now, those vines, I can find wines. In fact, I have one of, it's called Serpico, and it's the original ungrafted vine. So it's 150 years old. They will produce completely different wines than other parts of Italy. So yes, volcano, those soils are very important. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it did. I actually have one more question. Are you all going to, or have you started doing the tours again? Will you take people and go over there?
We have not. There's still so many changes about restrictions and stuff like that. And we've done consulting, but that's just about it. So we're kind of stuck with the consulting aspect of everything and just helping people find the right places and, passing them along all the information and stuff like that. We're hoping to get that back up and running towards the fall, as long as everything stays clear. Look at that, ready to go.
And the crazy part is I've been able to go to Italy multiple times in the past year, and every single time, because of COVID restrictions, it's been different. So the testing requirements have been different. The masking requirements have been different. The availability of places, some places, especially museums, restaurants, nothing is as it was pre-COVID. So maybe when we go back in the summer, so in June, I'll be there late May, but early June, when that's really the kickoff of the summer season, things might be more normal, but it's a guessing game right now. So we just have to be patient, pazienza. That's the key word, dealing with Italy, patience.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to that, hopefully, at some point.
Definitely.
Yes.
Anything else?
No, I think that was a good one to close it out with. That was what I was going to ask too, is after transitioning from launching the tour to then doing what you all are doing now, just were you finding that you were enjoying this more, or was there a plan to hopefully go back into the Italian tour once things hopefully continue on an upward and positive trajectory? But that was going to be my question too. And then just to add that, yes, Kathy and I will be first in line when the tours are back up and running.
Woo!
Yeah, go really well together. The wine and the tours and wine tourism is, I think it'd be really fun to really explore places before we even get off the ground, because, for us, the reason that we started the travel agency was because the planning was just as exciting as the actual trip. We would find ourselves on the trip planning our next trip because we want to keep that excitement up. So, I think that hopefully everything will calm down and stabilize, and we'll be able to start planning stuff pretty soon.
Awesome. That's very exciting. Well, thank you, Ed and Julie, as always, for taking the time to put all this together and do this with us. This is fantastic. The presentation, the information, the history, the background, it's all amazing. And for anybody, especially anybody that watches on demand, you'll see Ed's contact information up on the screen. Please reach out to them if you ever have any questions, or even outside of just wanting to purchase an order, if you have questions for them, they're always happy to help and answer. But again, yes. Thank you, Ed and Julie. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Buona serata. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.
See you guys.